Thank you, Odger. Thank you, Carl and the EdCast crew, Kathy and Keith, for putting together a great conference. I think this actually, I'm impressed by the arc that they have created here, in that we started off with Jason, who is very involved in the disruption of higher education, sort of those funding all of those startup companies that are breaking walls down, and then just heard about sort of the fundamentals. When you break down a system, you need to look again at the fundamentals. What are the building blocks that you then need to use to build up a better system? And so we're looking at the fundamentals of sort of learning science there, thanks to Susan. So this panel, basically we're going into the university, people who are dealing with the institutional university, and talking about how do we rebuild this? What are these emerging models? What should they be? And Odger mentioned this as a panel debate, which I don't think our panelists were quite anticipating, but I think it's apt. Because what we'd like to do here is, actually we have a fantastic lineup that I'll introduce in just a moment, but part of the thinking with this panel is to bring together people who represent different segments of the higher education universe, of the university. And the reason that we wanted these different segments, this kind of cross-section, was so that they can represent the entire ecosystem and make demands on each other. Right? If we're going to push things forward as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, we need to collaborate. Right? This is going to take the technology providers, the researchers, the administrators at universities. And so I think this is a kind of a small ecosystem that hopefully we can cross-pollinate ideas of how can we actually move things forward very effectively. So I'll introduce our panelists here. Kenji Hajuka is a professor of education at Stanford University, immediately to my right. He is the Lee J. Jacks Professor of Education, an experimental psycholinguist who has worked on research, practice, and policy supporting English language learners for over 30 years. English language learning being one of the early areas for tech innovation. He also started a university, UC Merced, so he knows about starting up new higher ed institutions. So Professor Hajuka kind of represents to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of these things, if it's sort of oversimplifications, but represents a few hats on this panel. He's done a lot of work in education research methods. So education research. He also does a lot of work in education policy. He sits on the validation committee for Common Core standards. So he's our ed policy, ed research guy on the panel. And then just to his right, I believe we're Mark Hasseltine, right? Mark. So Mark leads the overall technology strategy and engineering efforts at edX. He's the tech guy at edX, which, as you probably know, is an online course platform provider. I think everybody in the room knows what edX is at this point. Mark works particularly on Open edX, the open source initiative that makes edX code freely available to the community. Institutions can host their own instance of Open edX and offer their own classes. So in this discussion, Mark will kind of be our tech and startup guy serving the higher ed community. Right? And then just next to him is Marty Hurst, professor from the School of Information at UC Berkeley. Go Bears. I know we're in enemy territory, Marty, but I'm with you. Marty's a professor in the School of Information. Her primary research interests are user interfaces for search engines, information visualization, natural language processing, and improving MOOCs. She wrote the first book on search user interfaces and is a leading expert in big data analytics. So Marty is the futurist on the panel, if you don't mind. But has done a lot of the early work in big data and search user interface, which is if anybody here knows what the future of education will look like as all of these tech trends continue, I think we can rely on Marty for a lot of insight. And then next to Marty is Eric Nelson. Eric's the Associate Dean of Online Learning at Columbia, and Eric will be our continuing education representative here. So Eric is the Associate Dean, as mentioned, for Online Learning at Columbia. He has been tasked with creating and establishing a unified vision for the School of Continuing Education's online programs. He's responsible for developing and aligning that program's goals with the cross-disciplinary and professional mission of the whole school. So Eric is kind of going to talk, within the university, he'll represent our continuing education, so those professional programs. How do you link up what goes on in the university with actually getting jobs, right, of the workforce, among other things. And then last but not at all least, Adrian Sanier, the Chief Technology Officer at Arizona State University, which I know some people are coming from beyond our borders here, but ASU has been really one of the leading universities in innovating and forging new models for higher education. Adrian is the professor of practice in the School of Computing Informatics and Decision Engineering at Arizona State. He is part of the ASU team pursuing an ambitious program of general education reform, combining big data, social networking, and evidence-based instruction. So among the innovations at ASU was the announcement this spring of the Global Freshman Academy, which makes the entire first year available for free. Anybody can go on there and start taking their first year of college without having to jump through any hoops, really. So really starting to tear down some of those walls. So Adrian, maybe we could start with you, kind of being in the center of the storm. And regarding this Global Freshman Academy, you've opened up an entire year's worth of classes, right, for free. Where is that going? I mean, it seems like we're starting to create this university of everywhere. Anybody can take classes from a given university, hopefully transfer those credits anywhere else. Do you see this growing to the entire 4-year program there at ASU? I mean, what's the trajectory for you guys?
Well, so if those of you know Michael Crow, a lot of this innovation at ASU really stems from his mind. Global Freshman Academy is an example of that. I watched him and Anant Agarwal in a meeting talking about what the future of MOOCs could be, and talking about the complexities of credentialing, and how can we get those things to meet. And Michael, just says, oh, well, what we'll do is we'll start with the freshman year, and we'll find a way to not only create this freshman year set of courses for free on the edX platform, but we'll build a pathway to transcript and ASU credit for it. And that's consistent with that vision. I think the challenge for all of conventional education, if you will, of the existing institutions, is to find these alternative projections that technology affords and figure out how to get them to scale. Michael has sort of done that through ASU Online, through the extension of his own of the on-campus university, and so this represents, I think, the next evolution. It'll be interesting to see what impact it will have, and I think that we're not, at this stage of the game saying, oh, we can bring all 4 years online. I think there's a lot of challenge there. But I think that we are starting to learn that those first year courses, we think we can do them, and we think we can do them in a way that is more interactive, that has more support, because there's a revenue stream potentially associated here. And the other thing we're doing with the Global Freshman Academy, I think is unique, is we're kind of flipping the model, right? Because the standard model is a gambling model. You as a student, you bring your money and you give some of it to the publisher and you give the rest of it to the institution. And then the institution spins a wheel and you don't really understand how that wheel works or and particularly if you're an entering freshman, you don't know whether you're going to be able to pass the chemistry course or not. And either way, at the end, the house keeps the money. And maybe you get some credit and maybe you don't. So what we're going to try to do with the Freshman Academy is flip that model. We're going to say, look, take the course for free. Take it as many times as you want. Try it. Figure it out. Get as far as you can get. And if you can get to a place where you're successful, then we'll accredit you and you pay us for it. And this business model, we'll see, right? Who knows? But it's a flip.
Is there a danger there that once people actually go through the education, get that education, and they say, well, the certificate, are you afraid of the revenue stream being endangered?
I think college credit's still something that really means something. And so we know there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to get that first year. And we also know that there will be benefit to people who complete the course without getting the credit transcripted. And look, we've just got to be ready for the change that this is all going to bring, right? Because we're already in a world where people can offer courses for certificates, and there are these sort of alternative credentials that are beginning to emerge. And so, this is no time for the faint of heart.
Well, we are indeed already in the age of online courses, and Eric, you have been heading up some of those courses at Columbia University, managing the online courses there, and particularly looking at the pedagogy, right? What are the best practices? What's a lesson that you've learned? How is this online world much different from the traditional classroom?
Well, first thing I think that we've learned is that whenever we get close to thinking that we have a handle on things, that we realize there's so much more to learn. And we need to continue to explore things and work on the pedagogical path to improve our courses for our students. There are differences, obviously, many of you already know, between the traditional and the online classroom, is breaking down those barriers of the physical world, being able to do anywhere, anytime learning. The fact that online courses are living, breathing animals that really is just something I love about them, because it's not just going to class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but it really mirrors kind of this real world where learning is occurring at any given time. And, online courses also allow us to level the playing field. People in face-to-face classes often are able to really take over certain conversations, and in the online world, everyone has the ability to participate. But one of the things that I think that, I've actually realized is at Columbia, there's been a real shift in how we look at our face-to-face and our online programs. And by that I mean, when I taught my face-to-face classes, I would create my syllabus myself, and then I prepare my materials week to week and go about my business in a really solitary way. Columbia's invested in a team. I'm really fortunate. I have a team of over 20 staff, a stable of freelancers, and 4 units. We have a media team, we have an online support delivery team, we have academic technologies, and most importantly, we have an instructional design team. And the online faculty come in for a 16-week design cycle. We have 3 of them throughout the year. And it's no longer a solitary process. It is really where they are working with us in concert to look at the narrative of a course. So it's not just about content anymore, but it is about looking at that whole journey throughout the course and making meaning for the student. So we spend a lot of time, about 6 weeks with the faculty in like 3-hour time blocks of meetings, talking about that narrative within the learning experience. Then we move into the build phase. We have course developers and so forth. And really what I'm trying to get at here is that this is no longer a solitary process for creating learning where it really has been in the face-to-face world. It's more of a team approach, and we go about working together to create the best possible products. And the other thing that, if I could just mention, the real importance of is the power of faculty advocates. Most of you that know or have been around long enough to realize that bringing online has been kind of a struggle in the past to bring it into acceptance, but especially with faculty on campus, those that embrace online and create really quality ways of teaching in this space are really valuable to bring the rest of the faculty along with us. So those things I think have really been important for shifts in what we've been doing.
That's interesting. It's becoming more collaborative within the university. Whenever you have a team working together, you need a vision of the future. So Marty, maybe we could turn to you, since we've got a team here and everybody in the room thinking about where we want to go by 2020 and 2025 and beyond. What do you see as the future of education, as the technology trends that you have covered over the years at Berkeley continue? What do you think it's going to look like?
Thank you. I wasn't sure if this was only about higher education or education generally when you posed that last night. It sounds like we're talking about higher education so far in this panel. But when, I guess I follow Paul Safo's advice, don't try to predict and try to forecast. And he says forecasting is it's based on looking at larger societal and technical trends and projecting outwards. And there's a lot of societal trends, and I think they were covered really well in earlier talks. So I'll talk about some technical trends that are happening now and see how they can impact. And also, one of the things in my bio that you didn't have a chance to get to is that I helped co-found the Learning at Scale conference sponsored by ACM, the big computer science technical society, professional society. And that's where the best MOOC research is being published. So I try to stay very up on the latest research in this space. So I think the important technical trends that are impacting education, besides what our NSF leader put forward are obviously data analytics is enormous, and that's going to have a big effect. But also natural language processing is getting more sophisticated because of these data analytics, leading to possibilities. Something that excites me are more sophisticated, say, essay writing tutors where you can watch what students are doing in real time. Say you assign a writing assignment to 1,000 students at once, not maybe simultaneously, but 1,000 students get the same writing assignment. You see the mistakes they're making, monitor that, and in real time give feedback to help them improve their writing. You can really see what works and what doesn't in a tutor when you have a lot of people writing the same assignment and getting similar feedback. I think we could really revolutionize things like essay writing tutors in a way that we couldn't when we didn't have lots of people online doing the same thing. Online collaboration has improved enormously in the last few years. 10 years ago, there weren't good online collaboration tools, but now there are, and so that's completely changing how we do things online. So the crowd work research literature is just burgeoning. There's amazing things people are doing, getting people together for short bursts of time to get work done. There's this term that came up in the recent literature called learner sourcing as opposed to crowdsourcing, where the idea is that by students helping each other to get tasks done, they learn better. This is an old idea in the learning literature. Obviously, if you explain something to someone, you learn it better. But how do you harness that online using the tools from crowdsourcing to help people learn better? It's very exciting. There's also been a huge increase in understanding in behavioral psychology and social psychology, nudging and how do you motivate people in games and so on. So applying that towards educational strategy in technology, the two together, as the NSF speaker was saying, bringing those together in strategizing exactly what to show when in the technical tools to aid learning is extremely powerful. And there was a result at Learning at Scale showing if you showed the instructor, a teacher in a classroom, how the students were doing versus not showing them how the students were doing on tasks, the instructor could see very clearly which students needed help versus which didn't, which helped the instructors go to the students that were performing least well rather than helping the students in the middle of the curve, which is what they otherwise would do, which resulted in everybody getting a lot more assignments done and doing better at the end of the class. And then, of course, neuroscience, there's a lot more understanding of the brain going on. There's going to be, so that is going to result in, I'm going to make two main forecasts. So the first is, all of this together is going to result in personally tailored material leading to mastery learning. And when I say personally tailored material, I mean many, many assignments that adjust as the student learns. But it's not just assignments, it's also instructional material adjusting. That's already happening some. Zoran Popovic does outstanding work in this area, but that's just going to be huge. And it can be motivated also by neuroscience, like reading what's going on with the student. But also, this can be done in groups. So number two is just-in-time human help. It's going to be more social. So we've done work in our MOOC chat system showing that if you have small groups of people, just like we know from in-person learning, small groups, structured peer learning do better than students alone. We've shown how to do that online. Can you put groups of 3 students together to talk about a question before they answer? They first answer on their own, then they answer in a small group, then they answer it again. If you give the incentive that if all 3 of you get this right, you get a bonus, they do better. And so we've replicated that online, and lots of other people now are very interested in how do you get groups together online. And we also want to have just-in-time human tutoring, just-in-time human instruction. So I think with this vast ability to connect people online, it's going to be a lot more just-in-time human tutoring. So it's not going to be the isolated thing that we've seen in initial MOOCs. It's going to be a lot more in touch. So my 2 main predictions are personally tailored material leading to mastery learning, or mastery learning is you don't move on until you understand what you're doing, and just-in-time human help.
Thanks, Marty. So these things, the just-in-time help and personalized learning are obviously going to take a lot of technology backend to make this happen at scale. So I'd like to turn to you, Mark. at edX, you have been fueling a lot of the innovations that's going on with the platform there. And also, I posed a kind of provocative question to you yesterday of, do we really need open source? I think in some ways Marty may have just begun to answer that question, because with this need to bring together many, crowdsource things, there's going to be a whole slew of products that need to be developed. But talk a little bit about Open edX and the need for open source. Why is this important? Do we really need more platforms? It seems like we've got a decent crop already on the MOOC front.
Sure. And I don't think that we really need more platforms. I think we really need is more rapid development of teaching, learning, innovation. I think that's what everybody wants, right? And I think, more importantly, we need data, driven proof of the efficacy of those innovations. So, in my mind, that's really where the open source and the open accessibility comes into play. So, we believe that if you have an open source platform that anybody can use, it gives you kind of a base foundation that everybody can build from without having to re-implement, say, the non-teaching specific pieces. And then with open standards for integration and extension of that platform, you get kind of a level playing field that everybody can participate in. And we think that fostering these kind of ecosystems, it really allows the experts in education to do what they do best. It also allows us to conduct this kind of large data set research that everybody wants, all in at least a similar way, so that we can really get to what we'd like to see is more learner diversity, worldwide access, different skill levels. You can really see how effective these different learning techniques are. So I think that's a round way of saying I think we do need an open platform, and I think the open source way to do this is the right one.
So you mentioned a big reason for the need of this is to facilitate more research, to figure out how can we learn more and more data. And Kenji, I'd like to turn to you, having worked in education research, particularly in language learning. There seems like there have been a lot of leaps forward, but a big question is all of this new data that's flowing in to researchers really leading to quantum leaps in the quality of education? Sometimes we can, I think, get very excited about the potential there, but have you seen really big improvements coming out of research?
Thanks. I'll refer back to the earlier keynote by Susan about the silos of the disciplines and the need to break that down. My experience when we started UC Merced in the early 2000s, it was a university where the vision was to not have departments and disciplinary walls, and so we did what, as administrators, we could try to do, which is say, well, we won't have departments. We'll have the school of the whole and so forth, and guess how long it took for those disciplinary walls to come back up, because when you hire an economist, they're an economist. When you hire a historian, they belong to the American Historical Association and so forth. And so those institutional categories simply don't seem to matter. But what really one of our mantras was, so you can't hurt cats, but we can move the food. So, what you do is you change the incentives and you try to sort of create pockets where you can get collaboration and interdisciplinarity going, and even that's difficult. But that's and I think that this the new online space does start to afford that. So I think one of the big takeaways is really to create these, to use the emerging technologies as sort of to serve the purpose of enabling and encouraging collaboration. I happen to work in a very fortunate space of I was introduced as a psycholinguist, and that's sort of looking at the psychological and linguistic sort of basis of human learning, and I think language, especially this is true in the United States, which is basically a monolingual society for the most part, that people are really unaware or not so aware about the role that language really plays in all aspects of learning as well as in student assessment. And so so what we're using so I've done about 14 MOOCs or so. which have focused on the very specialized areas, more around the professional development and continuing studies sort of area of getting teachers to understand better the language basis of academic learning. So content learning, language used in science or math or history or social studies, and how does language really represent it, and the way in which we've used it is really not as, the MOOC is sort of the part that allows us to get funding and to do the work, but it really is a way to enable collaboration. So what we're doing is getting the teachers who take the courses to basically capture examples of student language. So what they do is they actually go to their classrooms, capture examples of their students engaging in a math problem, for example, and to transcribe it and share it within the MOOC and have a collaboration. And what that does is it really creates an awareness of the roles that language plays in academic learning, which then the teachers develop awareness and so forth. So that's one piece. And then the other part of the collaboration is we've engaged other universities to co-develop courses with us. That's an explicit part of our strategy. So it's not just the Stanford course. It's Stanford with the University of Washington, Stanford with University of California, Davis, and so forth. And so that we can kind of get the shared content. And then on top of that, we get shared data from the courses. So the fortunate thing about language is that once you digitize it, you can do all kinds of things with that. So there's kind of a secondary product of the course that creates a database of student language, which we're trying to convert into more of a citizen science kind of initiative, where teachers, but also disciplinary-based faculty in those areas could start mining it. So I think my bottom line, I guess, is using it as a basis for encouraging collaboration across disciplines.
So I want to pick up this thing of institutional change. Adrian, at ASU, you've taken the biggest public university in the country, I think 60,000 or so plus undergrads, and managed to create this program. I can't imagine that wasn't hard to get all of the players to work together in an innovative way. Did you have to move the food so the cats didn't need to be herded?
No, I wouldn't say we did. I think there's an appetite for moving forward that wasn't present 5 years ago. I was listening to the panelists here, thinking, man, if 5 years ago people were saying this, I would have thought we were really close to the goal, right? You've got Jason talking about, there's courseware that now is starting to come out, sponsored by Gates, sponsored by others, that people are beginning to think, it makes sense for us to make it together. You talked about, Eric, the notion that, still the Lone Eagle model is by far and away the way most people are taking their courses. Most institutions now either have a group like Eric's does, or they're thinking they need one. And so, Kenji talked about the idea that, there's courses now where we're thinking not only of developing them for Stanford as a whole, but to get many universities to use them. And then there's a platform like edX that is not sort of focused on the individual practitioner. You think about the previous generations of learning management systems, and they've all been skewed toward the do-it-yourselfer model. And edX is a very different sort of notion, this idea that we're going to collaborate together, we're going to produce these things, not once, but many times in succession. I think there's a movement here now. There are lots of people inside the institutions that see that this is the way this is going to go, at least for some educational experiences, and that they're going to be human online. They're not just going to be passive online, that we're going to make real communities, real research communities who are studying the effects of these courses, and real learning communities that are interacting around them. And I think the next 5 years tell the tale.
Eric, I want to turn to you for a second. As we were talking before the panel a little bit about your desires for technology, some things that you would like to be able to do to move this forward, right? Are there, as you think about your online courses, are there things that you want to do that a guy like Mark might be able to help out with?
Well, one of the things that I think we were talking about before is the fact that when you look at the cost of your education today is what are we doing to help our students find employment? And one of the things that we've been looking at is you have these rich conversations that are happening in courses, but at the end of the course, that conversation dies. So how do we create communities that continue that conversation? So maybe the class has the conversation outside in a space where it continues on, and then your students graduate and they get jobs, and those alums come back into the conversation, you share content with them, they become mentors for the students that are currently in your programs, and those connections and networking are really important to help them be able to find employment. So one of the things that we've been looking at and trying to figure out is how to use the technologies such as EdCast or edX or any of the others to provide this community space to really develop the continued support and communication through our current students and alums.
Mark, is there development along those lines?
There actually is. So it's interesting because it goes to like what the next evolution of moves are. But you can think about it both from an institution perspective, where the instructor, the course creator, might want to create different groups of students that have some commonalities. They might want to be able to work together, offer specific content that makes sense for those groups. You can also flip it and think about it from a student organizational perspective. Students that want to collaborate within a course, study groups, those sorts of things. That's definitely where we're headed, feature set wise, and there's a big demand for it.
So I want to just throw out some general questions, and anybody can jump in on these at any point and have kind of a free-flowing conversation. But one is the question of, is the real innovation going to come from within the universities, or is it going to be most of those companies that were up on the slide earlier in the morning, the edges, right? All these, basically, we're hearing a lot about people saying, is the university even worth it now? You're looking at the mounds of student debt. I can go on Wikipedia, let alone all of these other emerging educational content sites to get my education. Is the real change coming from within the university or without it? Or is it some combination of these two?
Okay, I'll go first, because I usually like to go first. All the other models are where you send other people's children to school. If you think about where you want your children to go to school, you think first about the same kind of educational experience you got, because there's some kind of magic alchemy that happened to you. Because you went in not capable of executing in the economy, and you came out amazingly able to do it. So there is something, it's not a massive scam, right, that's been perpetrated on the people, right? It's not a massive scam. But it's true that it doesn't work for everybody. It's true that if it doesn't work for you, it's really expensive. And so the pressure that we're receiving from outside is fantastic. But clearly, we're not just going to take these 100-year-old institutions, hundreds of year old, and just fold them up, right? That's not going to happen. But we do have to develop alternative projections. And I think we see lots of examples of that happen, and I'm certainly proud of my university for the many different projections that we're coming up with here. But I think that there are also enormous opportunities to collaborate, and it's all around the development of these courses. When you think about these courses, especially, I'm sort of really interested in the freshman year right now, you can tell if a college algebra course works or doesn't. And you can tell who it works for, and you can tell how fast it worked, and you can tell whether it worked better this term than last term. And none of that has been happening in our universities. And it's going to happen now, and it's going to happen out loud, and it's going to happen out in public, and there'll be a huge amount of please all, please none about it. Right? Because every one of these courses that will be out in the public square, there'll be a whole bunch of people who go up and take them and go, oh, I can't believe this is what you call a college algebra course? It doesn't have this, and it doesn't have that, and it doesn't have that. Good criticism. And from the other side, oh, I can't believe it. This is what you call a college algebra? You're putting the bar way too high. It's absolutely unreasonable. There's no need to do like this and this. And that criticism will be good too. And that coupled with the publicizing, who's succeeding, who isn't, and are we doing better this term than last term? What Simon asked for in his last lecture at Carnegie Mellon is happening. It is now going to be a group activity to understand the research in whether this learning works or not. And it will happen now out loud. And I don't see any way that we cannot make progress now. I mean, I just don't see any way.
I have an anecdote, which is a student, a former student who did a startup, got involved in learning, just contacted me for kind of a check. I gave feedback. They pivoted, came back, and he said, I'm working with universities now with our startup because that's where people go to do learning. So it's not necessarily that the universities are doing it right, but that's where people go to do learning. And of course, we're talking about higher education right now, not lower education. But on the other hand, I think you're right about the external forces are where a lot of the innovative thinking is happening in terms of breaking the rules. I wasn't there for the Friday talks, unfortunately, but I do wonder about this notion of courses. So I think that courses are a very constrictive notion, and it's what universities and high schools and lower education are based on. And I think that is a lot more restrictive, a very restrictive way of thinking that is likely to get disrupted. And that's something that the universities will really resist. So that, and of course there's the lifelong learning aspect of the education that is different than what the universities supply. And so I suspect that a lot of innovation will happen there in the non-traditional learning situation, like the lifelong learning. And this notion of a course, I think, is really based on the way society was structured, and not necessarily because it is, because despite your eloquent description, your description of how a course is being made now, these high-end courses, is kind of like designing a feature film. And it can't really be changed very easily and so on. And that's one great way to make great content, but it's a very expensive way to make content that never changes. And then that's not always the way people want to learn, because it's one channel track for a very specific set sequence of information to be consumed. And I think that a lot of people want to acquire information in a quite more lean, agile way than that, and that other models are going to develop around that, and that's not what the university is set up for. So I think there's going to be alternative paths as well.
I think that, university is not a monolith, and so you really need to sort of look at the specific areas within it. I mean, I think it's no coincidence that it's sort of computer science and the professional areas where you get sort of this permeability, because those are much better connected to the needs of the outside world. And I think that's a very distinct problem, different problem than the interdisciplinarity within the traditional disciplines. And I think within the disciplines, I think it really has to be the idea that with the information explosion, you really can't know everything. Kind of within the people who exist within the walls of the university, and that you really need to kind of leverage that. But I think those are different incentives than what's happening in the professional space. I think professional space is quite easy to kind of break those barriers.
So we were talking about this increased pressure of accountability now that we can find out if these courses are working. Adrian, Mark, are there types of information you would like to have the researchers look at, the edX, Marty? Are there kinds of things that you want to know that you think that they could dig into and tell you? Adrian, Eric, are there kinds of, what kind of accountability? Are you getting the data on accountability that you want? Are you able to see right now how effective your courses are?
I think some courses yes, some courses no. Right? So very, very important not to talk about it as though it's all one piece. But I'm going to return to mathematics again, because I think it's the litmus test about what technology can do. Right? It's the place where things are the most explicit. I don't think there's any doubt that the many universities now that have switched to a model that uses some form of personalized tutor, so that you don't attempt to have all the students learn the same thing at the same time. You instead have you essentially use the computer to focus the student at their zone of proximal development. And then, as Marty pointed out, you have to put the learning community around those students so they have places to go to ask questions when they're stuck, when they're stopped. And you have to have that personalized tutor provide data to the instructional team, not the instructor, but the instructional team, the instructor and the team of coaches, team of tutors that are trying to do that support. There's no question that it's like looking inside somebody's, it's like having an fMRI to know, do they know that concept or don't they know it? How much do they know it? How weakly do they know it? It is so different than giving an exam at the midterm and writing down the letters and thinking, oh, those kids are sort of smart and those kids are kind of in trouble. It is so different than that. That, I think it is the harbinger of what the data can do. And I pick math, right, because it's the one where, you know, there's no soft side to it. You either know it or you don't. And so I think there are signs that that data-driven pedagogy is amazing in terms of what it can help a learning community do to help one another learn that concept.
So let's talk about data and research. What are the most promising areas for future inquiry into research? You know, we're getting all this data, big data hoses. What can we do with it?
From the language point of view, I think actually there is a zone even within math where there is sort of degrees of knowledge as, you know, kind of being able to express your understanding of an idea. And I remember one of our language snippets we got was a student discussing what the meaning of irrational number, the fact that irrational numbers contains the word ratio. And what does that mean? And having a student discussion about that shows that there are gradients of understanding about even the concept like an irrational number. And so, and I think it's partly, I think from a language point of view, the data that's going to come out of the MOOCs around sort of language expression of knowledge and how we can mine that as an alternative form of assessment of human understanding of ideas is really going to be exciting.
I have a notion I call MOOCs in progress, which is to
collaboratively develop online courses with the students with full knowledge that they're helping you and themselves develop this new way of teaching where they know that they're part of the study to figure out how they learn and how you teach this material, and together they see as the material gets better and as they get better, as you get better at teaching that, and it's, you know, based on informed consent that this material is being shared and so on, and they participate as part of this process, and that the information is out there, so people can see when we participated in the study, this is how good the results were for helping to develop these tools to automatically help you learn, and then as more people participated, the tools got better and people learned better and so on. So it's a virtuous sort of feedback cycle.
You know, it seems to me that this kind of research and practice is better, as Adrian was saying, better suited for the mathematics. Is there a concern that as we become more data-centric, as we can focus on the things that we can measure easily, that we lose the humanities, that we lose kind of that authentic, rich, you know, experience that usually goes along with humanities courses on the campus?
Well, I mean, I think people in those fields are concerned about that, but people are definitely looking at fields other than mathematics for how to apply these technologies. But that's why my bullet number 2 was about just-in-time human help, and it's not all about automating numbers. It's really about having the connectivity that the web gives you of being able to bring people together just in time, because there are a lot of people out there who want to help or that can't help. It's just getting the timing and the coordination right.
You know, the opportunity, I love this notion of the MOOC in progress. The opportunity to, in real time, over a longitudinal horizon, be able to study the efficacy of every single asset. You know, like video, tremendously underrated, right? Because so much of what we do is experience the same kinds of content that can be delivered in a video. But the opportunity with the video is to chunk it, to tag it, to put it in its just right spot, to know what it is you're trying to deliver with it, and then to tell, well, how many people watch it? Do they watch it all the way? When they do, are they able to succeed at those answers? What we have been able to do in some of the courses that we've analyzed is determine which assets are working and which aren't. Just like this panel discussion, right? Like every one of these is just a flyer. Oh, I don't know, how many people in the audience could be interested with any given answer? Well, in a MOOC, you'd know. Like, oh, Adrian's answers, everybody tunes out and they just drop those assets and produce a new one. And so the opportunity to get better in progress, That's very real, and that's real from math to the most esoteric of humanities.
Well, we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask a question, and then we can open it up for questions from the audience. But I'd like to go down the line here, and if you could wave a magic wand and get whatever you wanted from the other segments of the higher education ecosystem. There's the researchers, the technology providers, the administrators, the education policy folks. If you get whatever you want to build what you want to do what you want to do in the next 10 years, what would it be? What do you want from them?
I can start. For me, I think the cross-segmental pieces of higher education and connecting those is absolutely important. I mean, I think there's a lot of resource and knowledge in the community colleges, for example, that the four-year institutions don't connect to. The work that Tony Frank is doing with remedial math that's going on in community colleges. It's equivalent things going on around writing, the remedial writing classes. Those are huge needs that address equity, and I think there's a lot of untapped knowledge there, and by connecting that to what's going on in the four-year institutions would be really, really valuable.
Well, for me, as a technology provider trying to enable, particularly researchers in the education community, what's a challenge for us is trying to figure out, what kind of features should we be delivering to enable different kinds of research. It's such a broad, kind of vast area, different research groups have different, needs and requests. Obviously, with technology, we can build, whatever people want, we can track whatever data people want. A lot of it comes down to privacy, and, how we can expose that data, and what permissions we have to get ahead of time. But for some of those things, it's very hard to do retroactively, right? And at least as a technology provider, it's hard to figure out what are the different pockets that are out there, kind of emerging trends, features that they'd really like to see.
I think I'd like the universities to stop worrying and just let us experiment and not worry about making money and not worry about certificates, and let us just experiment and be public university and try to help education.
So we're actually very new into the MOOC world, but one thing that I know that we're concerned about is also looking at how we take a look at authentic assessment and ways of making sure that in this scaled out way that we make sure the students are actually learning the concepts that we really want them to learn. So assessment and engagement, instructor presence are things that we want to focus on.
So I don't know, I'm encouraged by this panel. I think the table's set. I think that the network of devices exists, and it's very clear that it's going to exist. I think that the core technologies, which were sort of a twinkle in everybody's eye in the 2000s, they're now firmly established. The sort of broadband initiatives are there. It's craftsmanship now, and the opportunity to have enough time to work on it, right? So that these collaborative courses that span multiple institutions develop, and these learning communities emerge around them. And I think not only impacting higher ed, but also certainly impacting high schools, as people can utilize the same curriculum in 9 to 12. It's just a matter now of getting the work done.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. We do have some time for questions, and it looks like there are a couple microphones there in the back of the room. We can start here while people start lining up. Here. There we go.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Well, hi, I'm Jay Cross, and I'm very much an outsider. I'm not an academic. In fact, my title of my company is Chief Unlearning Officer. And I really feel like I've been invited into the college silo, because just taking the focus on STEM, I mean, my understanding is STEM has about the same half-life as a jar of French mustard in my refrigerator. After a while, it's, I do the same thing. And it looks like if one's professional career is a marathon, we've been talking about how do I do a good 100 yards? And then, hey, sorry, up to you. And that's up to everybody in the workforce. So I don't know how we can fail to address that, the continuity. and is for evaluating things. Does it work in the workforce? Not is it the most efficient algebra course, but does anybody need algebra? Things like that. So I'm a little unsettled by what I'm seeing.
Thank you. Actually, maybe I could ask Eric to respond to a related kind of question, just to turn it into a question. Eric, you do care a lot about the workforce implications of your work in continuing education. And are there things that you would like to be able to do better, to be able to track and make sure that there are those implications panning out?
Well, I think the first thing is to just make sure that you get rid of the disconnect. And I think that what we've done is brought in a lot of people from industry into our advisory boards, and we're talking about what the needs are within the workforce, trying to make sure that we know what those competencies and skill sets are. So it's really this communication and collaboration within the community to figure out really where those needs are and trying to develop people that come out into the workforce. It's also, we have a program where we have our program directors created 160 mentors within who are CIOs, and those personal relationships and connections and projects that they're working with are trying to bridge those differences or things they're getting out into the workforce and not be ready to hit the ground running. So that connection is really important to us.
In the case of our MOOCs that we work with, they're precisely cases where they are, our intent is to impact workforce efficacy for teachers. And those are our main takers. And so, yeah, we take that very, very, very seriously and measure it. So.
Quick question on that. Big data seems to be driving a lot of people's vision of the future in academia. Does any of the data collected from industry somehow get coordinated with that so there's still a lifetime rather than...
Did everybody get the question? So the question was, there's a lot of data coming from industry. Is there a collaboration between the university and all of this data that's coming from? Was that fair enough?
Well, we do the same thing. We track an individual once they're out of college and somehow look at their success.
Do we track individuals beyond college once they're out of college and track their success?
So I know, speaking for my own institution, it's a thing we want to do. It's a thing we can do in a very small way. And when we talk about it in a positive way, it makes all kinds of sense. Oh yeah, can't we track it? We like find out what your grade was here, and we're doing more of that, both inside our institution and. But then the flip side of that is, holy smoke! Wait a minute. There's entirely too much information being collected on each and every one of us already, and now you're already. What if this handles what I'm able to study? What if it confines my opportunity? And this, I think, is going to be a big discussion for our society as a whole. How are we going to be able to utilize this data effectively while at the same time retaining some sort of shred of privacy?
Great. Let's go to the next question.
I'm Eilif Tronson. I'm with SBI, a spin-out from SRI International, and Strategic and Silicon Vikings. I totally buy what you were talking about, Adrian, in terms of the direction we're moving in and so on. But I think many, especially smaller higher education institutions, particularly in the Nordics, even if they buy the model, they see where they need to go. We haven't talked much about the cost. It sounds like an expensive proposition to have this team of developers and to really do a good job. So I'm sure many of them are nervous that they're not going to be able to play that game. And the bigger institutions like yours who have the funding and can really put together quality courses are going to displace them. So if you could address that a little bit, I would appreciate it.
Well, sure, I'll take first crack, but I think Kenji said it. This is not about any one university making courses and then colonizing all the others. This is about developing vibrant learning communities that everybody's contributing to, that are highly curated and have the advantage of resource concentration, right? Like, to develop these kinds of things, you can't do it as an individual practice. You can envision it, oh wow, look what you, but I can't do this with the resources I have as an individual professor. And so there'll be no doubt that people will begin to adopt courses that are developed outside of their walls, in the same way that they currently use textbooks today. But the difference is it's much more of the course. And so it will change practice, and there will be people who don't like it. and who don't think it's good. The difference between the old days and the new days will be, well, but it is no longer a matter of opinion, because it turns out that this math course that I've got here works for 8.5 out of 10, and your math course only works for 5 of 10. So you either make a better one, or you really should get on the track here. And so I think there's a competition coming that hasn't been there, and it will change the nature of what you do in a smaller institution, because it will be much less about, oh, I need to invent this curriculum every day. It will be much more about, I need to make sure that I have students that succeed. And for my money, that's a good trend.
Yeah, I will say one thing that we're seeing a lot of demand for is content libraries. So most universities aren't really proprietary about the content. They're happy to have other people use it. It's just that we need a good mechanism for being able to discover it, understand its effectiveness, and put together courses, with content that you create as well as content that other people created and works. I think those kind of ecosystems are coming.
edX CS50 is a good example. There was a course developed by Harvard, CS50. It's a terrific intro to computer science course, and the faculty of Yale voted to use it instead of make their own. And Yale could totally afford to make their own, right? So I would suggest that that's the beginning of a trend.
And again, also there are different models, right? So setting up and running your own, open edX instance, could be expensive. You could, have edX.org host your course rather than you having to create it yourself. I think there are kind of less expensive ways to go about it now as well.
Vance Nichols, Innovation Scholar, USC Research School of Ed. This is probably more for Marty and for Adrian, but how do you see this necessarily, or maybe I should just say it this way, how do you see K-12, maybe especially secondary, but not just secondary, how do you see that they have to necessarily adjust, modify, begin to change for this brave new world that's happening, and for the higher ed that our kids are going to be going into?
Well, I think the changes in education are more important for the K-12 than for the higher ed. I think that's the pressing problem, and actually the technology directions that I forecast are really more to help the K-12. And the terrific work that's been done by people like Zoran Popovic and others that have been published are really for helping kids like that. For example, this algebra tutor, algebra learning tool, excuse me, that shows mastery learning. It starts as a game where kids are moving around pictures of dragons and tomatoes, and then it turns into, ax plus y equals 8, and sort of magically, really. It's not magic, but it's a game. And kids can master learning these equations in an hour and a half of gameplay. And the tool, they modify this game to have personalization adaptation. Some kids need to do hundreds and hundreds of examples, even up to 1,000 examples, but they enjoy it, and it's a game. Other kids, not so many examples are needed, and and they enjoy doing it. They also introduced this with a competition, so they had an entire state do this competition to master this algebra problem, and they an entire country, Scandinavian country, did it as well. So I mean, being creative about that, bringing this sort of learning in new innovative ways using technology combined with people. It was done in teachers' classrooms. So teachers signed up and they guided the kids. The kids did it in the teachers' classrooms, but then they could play the game after hours, and a lot of them did. So I think that's the future. That's what I see is that people are innovating that way, and that's where it really matters. By the time you get to college, you're supposed to know how to study.
Great. Why don't we go over here, this microphone?
So my name's Esther Wojcicki. I founded the Media Arts Program at Palo Alto High School. I'm a K-12 teacher, high school actually. And so one of my questions about all this is kids learn a lot when they interact with each other. And so what we have is we have a lot of stuff online, MOOCs, all kinds of games like you were talking about and all that stuff. Teachers put the kid in front of a computer and then they interact with the computer. What are we doing, or what can we do to encourage more human interaction? Because that's where the learning takes place, and we're not doing enough of that. And that's why you have a huge dropout rate in Coursera and Udacity because people don't learn independently, just like they don't exercise independently, even though they buy all those gym equipment. And then and they sell it in June after they realize that they're never going to use it. So that's my question. There must be something that we're going to do to help with that.
Our work is around collaborative structures that are both encouraged online as well as in a kind of a hybrid way. And I think I hope that part of the message that we're moving away from just that, how you characterize online learning, although I recognize that much of what's out there is still in that mode. The most success that you can find is among the courses in which you have this kind of hybrid collaboration. I mean, our course that we've worked with school districts, if you have just traditional MOOCs, our completion rate is about 2%. When we have a hybrid and district encouraged MOOCs, it's well over 80%. So it's dramatically different.
So what you're doing, Kenji, is great, but can't we get a plan for all the other teachers? Because the K-12 teachers don't have it. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So we've got the MOOCs, we've got the online stuff, but we have no pedagogy that encourages teachers to do this. And when they try to do it, it looks like chaos, and then they revert back to the rows of kids all interacting just with the technology.
I think you're right. The current structure of MOOCs is not designed for that. And I know someone who works for the Students Rising Above organization, which helps kids in Oakland and other areas that are children of homeless or people that have been in prison and who really have educational difficulties. And she was trying to help some kids, and they were in Oakland and they didn't have anyone to teach an advanced algebra or calculus class. I think it was calculus. And so I'm like, well, could they take a MOOC? And she's like, no, these kids have to have a teacher in the room to help them, and there wasn't any money to hire somebody to even lead them through a MOOC, which might have been an alternative way. So I think it's a serious problem, and some people really need interaction, which is why that was my bullet number 2 for the future. It really has to be people working together for most learners. Most learners are not independent learners. I think you're completely right.
So we've got time for just one more question, unfortunately, but hopefully the panelists will be around for discussion afterwards. Go ahead.
Eric Tao, California State University, Mountain Bay. So we are as far as we know, we are the only one courageous enough to offer a Bachelor of Computer Science program completely online among all the public California universities. So far, so good. So you can see kind of I'm leading to, when you look at the Gates Foundation, the list of income, they don't list someone have the PhD level of learning outcome, they get this income, they get a degree. So our business is not only to teach, but to certify the student actually achieve it. So we are at the stage, it's no longer lack of content, but we lack of a massive, effective assessment model that to prove, yes, this student can get a computer science degree. I want to kind of tap your brain, in addition to deliver the content, what's the best practice to do a massive online certification of learning?
So I'll take this one because it's a challenge that we've essentially signed up for. And when we think about trying to do freshman year, one of the reasons that we choose freshman year as opposed to all 4 years is because we think that it's easier to assess things at the freshman year at scale than it may be at other things. I think that we have come to the conclusion that the only way that we can do it is through a combination of technology and humans. And so the analogy I'm going to use is the Uber one. So you think about what Uber did to transportation, right? What it does is take it builds essentially a mechanical turn, right? A system that is part technology, it's part human. It's a little hard to tell where the boundary is, right? Because things that humans used to do, all the dispatching and so forth, is now done by this hyper-efficient app. There's, people like all the question answering is done by this device, but then a human does show up and they do the parts that only a human can do. I think that this is the method by which we get this done. And you know, speaking now, I'm going to shift away from assessment toward coaching for a second. When you think about, like, when you build a system to do online coaching, at first that online coaching is entirely human. It's just mediated by the device. You know, you write me and say, hey, I don't know how to do problem number 7, and I record a video for you and I send it back. But after we've been running that for several years, the number of videos that I've collected to answer the questions about mathematics and the rating of, oh, this one was liked by a lot of people, and those people, once they liked it, actually succeeded with it, that library of stuff becomes a method by which I can provide you something that feels to you very personal, because it always comes from the same voice, and it seems to be in the answer to your question, but it's a machine that's doing it. And this is, I think, the way that this happens. It ratchets its way up. Now, assessment is even more difficult than help. But I think that, again, some combination of peers, networks of coaches that are sort of out in existing learning communities, backed by a combination of human and technology at the center. That's the mechanism by which we'll get this to scale.
And that's a good note on which to end. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But sounds like we do have a good to-do list here. We need, Mark, the technology to provide robust social interaction. We need some authentic, meaningful assessments linked up with real outcomes. And then we just got to start building this stuff, right? Making the content, using the feedback mechanisms, and get it out there. So thanks very much to all our panelists. Much appreciated.